Hi, Dr. P here to talk about one of the major flaws of multi-sided games, which is turtling. Turtling is one of the most natural occurrences you can get in a multi-sided game. A player sees that he or she is outnumbered, so they decide to hide out somewhere or some way to try to be unnoticeable, to try to be inaccessible. It's like a turtle that pulls into its shell. That's where the title comes from. It's passive, but it can be chosen as a deliberate strategy in some games that leads to victory, and that's the flaw. If turtling leads to victory, then you've got a problem. In general, it's bad for the game, although the intent of the game matters, of course. It can result in a stalemate, in nothing happening, in an overlong game, as in Kingmaker, for example. If that's the kind of game you want to design, okay. Also, if you're designing a semi-war game or peace game, such as Germania and Seas of Gold that I've designed, then players being peaceful is okay, as long as there's a war option for those who aren't as prosperous, to pull them out of that shell, so to speak. For out-and-out war games especially, turtling is generally bad. Now, how does it happen? If you're likely to gain in comparison to other players by staying out of the fight, by trying to be inaccessible, then turtling is a sensible strategy. You don't have to be gaining yourself, but if they're losing stuff, if they're going downward, as often happens in war games, then you are, comparing to them, gaining. There are lots of factors involved. For example, if it's fairly easy to defend, turtling is more likely. If it's easy to attack, turtling is less likely. A classic situation where turtling is just about impossible is a card game where every player in the game can attack any other player. Unfortunately, that tends to bring on leader bashing very badly. So leader bashing is kind of the opposite of turtling. If the only way to get resources or to become stronger in a game is to take them from someone else, then turtling is unlikely, as in zero-sum games such as diplomacy. If it's a largely destructive game, you can gain in comparison simply by retaining what you've got. Think of chess modified for more than two players. When people attack in chess, they're going to kill pieces and lose pieces, and if there's a third player or a fourth player who's not involved, then in comparison they're gaining because they're not losing pieces. If you can prosper peacefully better than you normally can from being aggressive, turtling is likely to occur unless it's easy to get people out of the turtle. Now, I'll say as an aside, I can't prove this, I believe turtling is much more likely in games of maneuver than games of placement. Because once a piece is placed, it's stuck there when there's no maneuver. Now, I can't say I think of many games of placement for more than two players, but they do exist. My game Law and Chaos is one. Now, you could make the opposite point of view, which is when you can only place pieces, you can't go get the person who's trying to stand aside, but you can always place pieces where they are. So you could argue this both ways. How do you incentivize aggressiveness, which is an ugly phrase, but it's one that you see. It does convey the essence of the problem. Why will people attack in your game instead of sit there and turtle? Now, I've seen games that give victory points for fighting to try to incentivize aggression, for example, Eclipse, space exploration game, but that's nonsense from any realistic point of view. Nonsense. It's an obvious kludge. Try to avoid kludges. The designer should arrange an economy in the game such that aggression usually leads to more and better stuff for the aggressor while passiveness does not. And zero games are the ultimate cure for turtling because that's exactly what happens. So don't tack on solutions. Instead, arrange the entire game so that turtling just doesn't lead to success. Now, if you're not watching what's going on with your game, you might find you have to recast it pretty thoroughly, but that's because you haven't noticed the problem earlier on. Keep in mind, in general, the easier it is to attack, the less likely that turtling will be successful, but there's a lot more to it than that. So in most multi-sided multiplayer designs, you'll want to keep an eye out for and stamp out turtling. It's rarely good for the game. Thanks for listening.